Arc 5, Stars that Engrave History. Chapter 42, The Newest Hero and the Most Ancient Hero. An oppressive silence had fallen over the refuge shelter. There was the occasional faint sound of sobbing and someone nervously tapping their fingers on the floor. Listening to that unsettling backdrop and that stillness, the girl hugged up her knees, feeling the coldness of the wall against her back. It was a little girl with golden hair. Resting her chin on her small, pale kneecaps, the girl gently wrapped her arm around the little bundle at her side. Leaning against the girl's left shoulder, with his head buried between his chest and legs, was an even younger boy, the girl's younger brother. He had been crying vehemently until now, but, apparently tired from the sobbing, had now fallen asleep. Wet tear tracks still lined his cheeks, and the corners of his eyes were red from crying. The girl wanted to softly stroke his hair, but hesitated, afraid that it might wake him. If he could sleep, then it'd be better if he kept on sleeping. While listening to her younger brother quietly snoring, she hoped that he might at least find some rest in his dreams. Because the reality outside those dreams would be far too harsh for her little brother to bear. Though the same applied to his older sister, thinking this of him. It had been several hours since the announcement that the control towers to the great water gates of Pristella had been taken. That morning, the girl was out in the city plaza with her little brother when they heard the broadcast. She couldn't believe her ears when she heard those words, full of hate and malice. Worrying for her parents as she listened to that unacceptable ultimatum, the girl took her frightened little brother by the hand and ran to the shelter with the adults around her. If an unexpected situation occurs, quickly retreat into the shelters. That was the emergency response procedure broadcasted from the city hall every morning. Honestly, the girl didn't remember paying much attention to the morning broadcasts aside from the bard songs. But those words nevertheless remained at the back of her mind such that she immediately remembered them when the emergency arose. However, neither the girl nor the surrounding adults seemed to have any idea about what to do once they were inside the refuge shelter. Which cult? Control towers. Great water gates. Demands. That vile woman's ear-piercing voice showered abuse upon the frightened people. Every one of her deranged, senseless words filled the girl and the adults' minds with dread. Trapped in this dark shelter, they knew nothing of what was happening outside. It was only natural that as time passed with no improvement in sight, panic began to take hold. First, the voices of mutual encouragement weakened, then gradually, anxiety and frustration festered in the silence. By the time anyone noticed it, displeasure had become apparent on the faces of everyone around them, and the atmosphere had been infested with pent-up discontent and hostile gazes. Once it begins, there's no stopping it. Staring at each other, shouting at each other. At worst, people begin trading punches. Even in this shelter, this atmosphere was looming, ready to explode at the slightest touch. Boy, Yet the perilous air on the brink of drawing blood was shattered by the girl's crying little brother. It appears that, even with the violent urge boiling inside them, the adults still had enough decency not to attack in front of a little golden-haired child crying for help. The sound of a child crying is powerful, in a way. She had always thought that her little brother's crying was noisy. But realizing what it had accomplished just now, the girl hugged her brother from behind and wept a little. With this alone, violence had been averted inside shelter. But everyone knew that it was only a temporary calm resting upon a precarious equilibrium. Next time, it would certainly not be something a child's cry could stop. Knowing this, the people in the shelter, who should be tied by their shared fates, began to keep their distance from each other, not only verbally, but with their gazes and their breaths. As if to avoid being influenced by other people's consciousnesses, they shut out everything from the external world. Who knows what might draw someone else's attention, incite their anger, and end up pulling the trigger. So whether it was for themselves, or for everyone else, they held their breaths with rigid faces as they waited for time to pass. Something will change if you just wait for it, they left themselves to that fleeting hope. Girl, eh? Suddenly, the girl lifted her face with a quiet moan. While silently yearning for a change to come, she caught the subtle shift in the atmosphere. Spurred to the same reaction, the people around her also turned their heads, perhaps for the first time in hours. This is because everyone living in this city knew that the faint tremble in the air was an indication that a broadcast was coming. In that world of silence, it almost sounded like someone nearby sighing. That precursor to the broadcast sent a sense of physical revulsion throughout her body. The change they were hoping for should have been something positive. But a broadcast only brings the witch cult's malice. What kind of impossible demand would that shrill voice impose next? But here, the girl's pessimistic prediction was betrayed. Can everyone hear me properly? Mic test, 1 2 1 2. Instead, the voice she heard was that of a youth who sounded somewhat confused. Unlike any other broadcast before this, the youth's voice was lacking confidence. It wasn't the charismatic voice of the man she had grown used to hearing every morning, but a young voice she had never heard before. The girl's eyes grew round. The surrounding adults also traded gazes of doubt, unsure of what was going on. Such sentiments would not reach the person behind the broadcasting device. Nevertheless, after doing a few more checks to make sure that the broadcast going through, the youth cleared his throat. And sounds like you guys can hear me, that's a huge relief. So, first of all, sorry for doing a broadcast all of a sudden. I probably scared you, huh? Considering the circumstances, most of you must be on edge about what I'm going to say. But don't worry. This isn't the witch cult broadcasting to you now. Please know that first. It's not the witch cult. Apparently not used to talking through the device, the volume of the youth's voice fluctuated up and down. But since the listeners were so overwhelmed by the content of his words, no one bothered to remark on it. Looking up overhead to where the voice seemed to be falling from, the darkened expressions on the people's faces began to shift. It was the sensation of having sighted the first glimmer of hope. Someone quietly muttered. Then that means we're saved. Those words encompassed the hopes of everyone inside the shelter. That's it. Isn't it? If someone who's not the witch cult is speaking through the broadcasting device, that can only mean that they've recaptured the city hall. If someone managed to drive the witch cult out of the city hall, then maybe the witch cultists in the control towers and all over the city are also. The witch cultists are all driven out. Next, I have to apologize for getting everyone's hopes up, because the threat of the witch cult hasn't gone away yet. We were able to retake the city hall, but there's still hold up in the control towers. Those guys' demands, and the danger of the city sinking beneath the water, are still in play. Please understand that as well. Yet, this fleeting hope wasn't crushed by anyone else, but by the youth behind the broadcasting device himself. It was almost as if the youth had read the minds of everyone inside the shelter. But isn't it far too cruel to extinguish their fledgling hopes this way? Someone who had unwittingly stood up with expectation in their eyes sat down again. Nobody can blame that someone for feeling discouraged, being told that their hope of being relived from their fears was misplaced. Instead, the fierce point of everyone's anger turned to the youth making the broadcast. I'm sorry. However, the youth had apparently foreseen that the crowd's anger would fall on him. Where are you listening to this broadcast right now? Maybe you're in one of the refuge shelters, and I'm sure there are those who didn't manage to escape into the refuge shelters as well. Everyone must be filled with anxiety, right? I can understand what it's like to be afraid and wanting to curl up into a ball. And I guess you're all thinking, who is this random guy toying with everyone's hopes at a time like this? I'm just a nobody. Like everyone else, I'm just being tossed around by fate, getting crushed under the unreasonable circumstances, and so scared that my legs can't stop shaking. That kind of guy. Even the job of doing this broadcast, I only accepted it after making a huge fuss. And I still think that the burden is too heavy for me. Honestly, there are others who are more qualified to talk to everyone like this. I'm sure there are. The youth's voice was trembling, as if speaking straight from the people's terrified and cowering hearts. And then, what followed was simply the honest thoughts of a youth doubting his own value. The attitude of the listeners had gone beyond surprise and disappointment, until all that was left was uncertainty. Right now, when what everyone yearned for was hope, why did they put this youth in front of the broadcasting device? Even the youth himself said that there were more qualified people. But why did they send him? But here I am, talking to everyone. So many people greater than I am told me that I should do it. That it won't be totally pointless. But can you hear me trembling? Speaking in front of people isn't my strong suit. I'm not good with words, and I don't have the charisma to lead anyone. I'm weak, helpless, and even here, in such an important position, I can't help but want to run away. The tone of his voice gradually fell, as if dragging the listeners' hearts into the abyss. That weak, faltering voice sounded like it was creaking through a chest shrunken by anxiety, only to tangle up at his stomach. If the youth behind that voice was within arm's reach, she would have liked to plug his mouth to shut him up. Boy, big sister. Before she knew it, her younger brother was awake. Hearing that call, the girl hugged her little brother's ears as if to keep that wimp's voice from sneaking in and infecting him with its cowardice. But as the price for protecting her little brother, that voice continued to strike upon the girl's eardrums, drawing her into its weakness. Still, the youth's voice went on. I don't know what I can do. What I really want is just to plug my ears, hold my head, hide in a corner by myself and wait for someone else to fix everything for me. Girl, no. Squeezing her eyes shut, the girl shook her head as if rejecting that sense of helplessness and despair. I know. I know, even if you don't remind me. What the youth was saying was nothing less than the inner thoughts of every person cowering under the witch cult's threat. It was the weakness eating away at the girl's heart. It was the cowardice rooted in the depths of the adults' minds. It was the unbearable dread tormenting her little brother's soul. Surely, it was something nobody could do anything about. And to have to face that unreasonable reality in spite of this. But since I can't run away, I'll fight. That's just the kind of guy I am. Saying this, the youth's voice was clearly shaking. Girl, huh? Not sure if she had misheard it, the girl opened her eyes and looked around her. The owner of the voice wasn't there. But all around, she could see astounded faces just like her own. The voice paused for a moment, as if choosing his next words. And? Let me ask you again. Everyone listening to this voice, where are you now? Have you escaped into a refuge shelter? Are you hiding inside your house? Are you trembling alone? Are you with someone? Are you with the person most important to you? Or, even if you're next to an unfamiliar face, is it a face that you have grown to know over the past few hours? It's a pretty arbitrary request, and it may be difficult, but please don't be alone. When a person is alone, they'll just start coming up with lame ideas. I know that from experience. Trust me. So please don't be alone. Stay with someone. And inhaling with only a slight hesitation. And if you can, look at the face of the person who's with you. Girl, huh? Following the youth's words, the girl's gaze slowly fell into her arm. Her little brother was looking up at her. His swaying, uncertain emerald eyes met hers. Whose face do you see now? Is it someone important to you, or a stranger who you've spent these past few hours with? Or maybe it's a friend. But most likely, it's a wretched face. A face that's about to cry, a face that's in distress, and I imagine it probably isn't smiling. No, perhaps there is someone out there who is putting up a strong face, forcing themselves to smile so as not to worry the people around them. If there is, then that's an amazing person. If someone you care about is smiling this way, you should be proud of them. But now, with that in mind, compare it with the smile you know. Her brother's face was close to crying. It was a crumpled face, a face that was about to burst into tears again. While, reflected in her brother's eyes, her own face was hollow as if it had lost its expression. Is this acceptable to you? Girl, no way. A small, thin voice slipped from the girl's lips. It was a weak and broken sound that was impossible even for herself to hear. Nevertheless, I can't accept this. I will not accept this. The youth's voice rang, as though having heard her reply. I also have people I cherish. Friends I hold dear. And I cannot forgive whoever put that pained, sorrowful expression on the faces of the people I love. I don't want you to force yourself to smile. You kidding me? Quit joking around. I want to raise my voice and shout that the smile of the girl I know should be way cuter than this. Boy, be big sister. I don't want to keep losing. It'd be too pathetic to give up here. There's no way I can allow it. They are the ones in the wrong. Even if you are too weak to do the right thing, to strike down those in the wrong, you should at least know what is right. And when you know that you are right, there is no way you can allow yourself to lose to those who are wrong. At least, I don't intend to surrender and bow to those guys. Girl, Fredo. Hearing her little brother faintly calling her, she gently held him closer and pressed her forehead against his. A feverish heat transferred between them. Hot, very hot, it was the heat of life. She couldn't tell if it was her younger brother's or her own, but the heat was certainly there. I want to run away, but I can't run away. I want to cry, but I can't cry. The enemy is strong, but I don't want to lose. And so, I'll fight. I know I am weak and stupid, but still I will fight. They are wrong. They are wrong to have made the people I care about look like they're about to cry. So fight. I will fight. And I want you all to fight. Girl, hook. Her breath clogged. Her throat suddenly closed, ashamed of her own weakness. Surely, it was because the voice of the youth had ceased to tremble, but had become powerful, as if pointing to the road ahead. She could understand the youth's feelings. She received the youth's message, painful and clear. In her heart, the girl's will was the same as the youth's. She wants to fight. She wants to do all she could to drive out the thugs who had attacked their city. But both she and her little brother were small, young, and their reach were far too short. They were helpless, ignorant, weak, and cowardly, and so. Don't get me wrong. I said I want you to fight, but I'm not telling you to pick up a stick and fight them. In fact, please avoid doing anything so reckless. I don't want you to mob up and spill blood fighting against the witch cult. What I am asking you to fight for is to not look down. Girl, to not look down. Staring at your feet isn't going to change anything. Your gaze isn't going to bore a hole in the floor, and even if it does, that won't fix a thing. So please, lift your face and look ahead. She looked up. Not at her knees, not at her brother's blonde hair, but at the shelter. And there, she saw the faces of those around her also lifting. Their eyes met, wide open as if in astonishment. Just like the girl, everyone had subconsciously raised their faces, obeying the voice of the youth. If you look around you, surely you'll meet someone's eyes. Like you, this is someone who is afraid and wants to run away. But, just like you, this is also someone who doesn't want to lose. There is the person you cherish, there is the person you are looking at now, and if you add yourself to the list, that's already 3 people. There should be more depending on where you are. Just as the youth said, the people's gazes intersected as they lifted their faces. The gleams within their irises were complicated, and surely, the girl's own eyes must have been the same. However, there now seemed to be something more than just tremors of terror. If you can see that you are not alone, then that's enough. You are not alone. That in itself is powerful, don't you think? I don't want to see saddened expressions on the faces of people I love. And I don't want the people looking at me now to see a miserable expression in my eyes. I'm not the only one who's so vain, weak, and stubborn, am I? That beseeching, calling voice was trying to muster the people's courage. And yet, to the girl's ears, the youth was pleading for help, for something, anything, to cling to. And then, she realized it. The youth's feelings had never changed since the moment this broadcast began. While lamenting his weak, insufficient self, he did not give up. He was telling himself that that was his only weapon, and telling everyone else that they were also the same. Please, help me believe this. I may be weak and hopeless, but I can't give up just yet. I'm not the only coward who hates to give up. Please, help me believe it. It was a cowardly voice. A cowardly plea. It was a voice which, when everyone needed help, was shamelessly shouting quicker and louder than anyone, please help me. Or, am I the only one? The voice lost its confidence. Or rather, the youth's voice had no confidence to begin with. A sense of agitation surged up. Don't go. Whatever it takes, she wanted to shout for him to stay. Girl, you're not. A faint voice, indiscernible like a mosquito's cry, spilled from her throat. This voice would not reach him. The reply would have to be louder. In order to answer the voice of that coward, afraid and alone. Who believes? Even now, we can still fight, am I the only one? Girl, you're not. Opening her mouth, the girl screamed at the top of her lungs. Voices resounded throughout the refuge shelter. Not just the girls. Others who had also lifted their faces shouted out as well. They were voices resisting against sorrow, weakness, and fear. If that was the youth's plan all along, then they fell for it through and through. Who cares, even if it was? That wimpy trembling of his voice, that faltering pep talk, that pitiful encouragement, and that pleading, clinging faith, even if all of it had been an act. If they fell for such a masterful performance, who could blame them? But if this really was the voice of a clumsy wimp, how could anyone just leave him be? I'm not, am I? Girl, you're not. You guys are still fighting, aren't you? You haven't been swallowed by weakness, have you? Girl, we haven't. We don't want to lose. The depths of her chest grew hot. The roots of her teeth were trembling, and a passion different from anger was raging. That feeling wasn't the girl's alone. It was a flaring passion engulfing everyone into a single inferno. The anxiety they had only recently shared now became a bonfire of a different emotion. If you are with someone important to you, hold their hand and believe in them. If you're with someone you don't know, give them a nod and assure them you'll do your best together. Because neither you nor that person have been crushed by defeat, or are about to give up fighting. And as long as everyone goes on fighting, I will fight to the end as well. I will fight, and win. In the end, this is just a shelter far away from the city hall. No matter how loudly they shouted here, no matter how they screamed that they are with him, none of it would reach the youth. Still, the youth sounded relieved, as though he had heard the girl and the others' replies. He received it, and proclaimed in a voice trembling in swelling emotion. I will fight and win. There was no question of whether it was possible. Only faith that surely he will. Just as the youth believed that the girl and the people of this city would not be beaten by despair. The girl and the citizens believed that the youth behind that voice will prevail in the perilous battle ahead. Why did they believe it? Because surely, this voice. My name is Natsuki Subaru. I am the spirit arts user who defeated Sin Archbishop Sloth of the witch cult. An uproar erupted at the revelation of the youth's identity. The girl didn't quite understand the significance of that declaration. But this was not the case for the people around her. The impact was overwhelming and certainly not in the negative sense. At first, they were startled, then, as comprehension followed hope and faith spread explosively as even the girl's heart was swallowed by that wave of emotion. My colleagues and I will do everything to take care of the witch cult in this city. So, please believe in us and fight on. Hold on to the hands of the people precious to you and cast away the cowering part of yourself that wants to surrender. And leave the rest to me. Deafening cheers erupted, flooding the shelter with heated enthusiasm. Expectation became hope, and in a single breath, one hope became hope innumerable. The girl looked down at her younger brother in her arms and saw the undeniable light dwelling in his eyes. Just to be sure, she embraced her brother tightly once more. Her brother's arms wrapped around her body in return, and, while savoring the warmth of that embrace, the girl looked up towards the ceiling. Unable to hide his fear or apprehension, that youth nevertheless took on the hopes of every person in this city and declared that he will fight. The girl closed her eyes, sketching out the image of the hero whose face she didn't even know, and prayed for every imaginable good fortune upon him. Because surely, he must be just a commonplace youth, fighting for the sake of someone important to him. Leaving the magic device shaped like a gramophone, Subaru slowly stepped back. Nervous sweat had completely drenched his forehead. Leaning against a nearby workbench, he roughly swiped it off of his brow. Taking deep breath after deep breath, he wondered if the device was picking up that sound. But when he looked to Anastasia, who was in charge of operating the device beside him, it seemed she had already safely powered it off. Instantly, he was washed over with relief. Subaru, that was exhausting. He spilled a sigh as his head churned with unimaginable fatigue. Honestly, he was in such a trance while he spoke that he could barely remember a thing he said. It wasn't that he forgot everything, but the memories were too vague in places. And he had Anastasia's speech notes too. Wiping off the droplets hanging down his chin with a sleeve, Subaru noticed that the room was extraordinarily quiet. The people who had been watching the broadcast didn't say a word. Beside Anastasia were Garfield and Al. While Julius and Ricardo, who later joined them, were also standing in a corner of the room. To see all these usually noisy people suddenly dead silent couldn't be a good sign. Unless, was his incoherent broadcast just that bad? Anastasia, Natsuki-kun. Subaru, I'm sorry. I'll do better next time. Anastasia, why were you apologizing? Strange child. With his heart racked by anxiety, Subaru blurted out an apology the instant he heard his name. While, laughing at his reaction, Anastasia tilted her head smiling. Anastasia, it's a strange thing to say to a strange child, but Natsuki-kun, did you? Subaru, HM? Anastasia, did you used to be a con artist back in the day or something? Subaru, what's with that baseless accusation all of a sudden? As you can see, I'm just a normal everyday student. Or actually, in a certain sense, I'm not even a student. Anastasia, no. I didn't mean that in a bad way. I was just trying to say that the way you spoke was exquisite. How you cast them into despair only to lift them up again, simply an impeccable use of rhetoric. Waving off Subaru's protests, Anastasia weakly giggled to haha. But, hearing this only made Subaru more muddled than ever. Subaru, rhetoric? The hell were you talking about? I blanked out right away and didn't even know what I was saying. All the letters on the cheat sheet got blurred together, and I couldn't remember a thing after I gave up reading. Anastasia, yeah, you pretty much skipped our draft. You can't imagine how I felt when right off the bat you started saying things that had nothing to do with what we discussed. But it seems I needn't have worried myself. Subaru, I'm very sorry about that. But generally, wasn't it more or less in line with the notes? I mean, if it was that bad, you would have stopped me, right, Anastasia-san? The notes in his hand, the cheat sheet he'd forgotten about at the most crucial moment, was filled with flowery oratory designed to clear away the anxieties of the people in this city. It was a proud conglomeration of Anastasia's negotiation techniques, Garfield's vast stores of proverbs, and even some of Subaru's modern knowledge of neat and witty comments. Even though he couldn't read from it when it actually mattered, he probably had some of its ideas floating around in his head and wound up including them in his speech one way or another. Anastasia, I don't know how to put this, but Natsuki-kun, your speech didn't even touch on anything in the notes. I mean, none at all. Subaru? Without leaving any ambiguity on the matter, Anastasia's words instantly shot down Subaru's speculations. Suddenly growing rigid, Subaru looked around at the others to confirm if this is true. However, the other four only showed their respective version of awkward faces as Subaru's gaze passed over them. Among them, Julius took one step forward. And, while picking at his front hair, Julius, it's just as Anastasia-sama said, Subaru. Your broadcast didn't contain any of the things we discussed beforehand. In particular, the part that was supposed to have been revealed at the start, about your accomplishment of slaying Sin Archbishop Sloth, was moved into the second half. It was almost to the point that I wanted to ask you what you were trying to do. Subaru, seriously? If I didn't say that, then wasn't I just some super random guy to them? If it was like that, you could have stopped me. Even if I had to start over, it would have been better than confusing the hell out of them. Julius, start over? That's unthinkable. While Subaru started flipping out at Julius' confession of doubt, Julius shook his head with an expression of complete seriousness. Then, with almost a sense of reverence towards Subaru. Julius, it was a wonderful speech. Subaru, what? Julius, it didn't matter that you forgot the notes. With your own ability, you've accomplished something far beyond our expectations. I have nothing but praises for your achievement. This is the same sentiment which I had felt when you slew the white whale and sloth. In front of a stunned Subaru, Julius only piled on his exaggerated praises. In a way that was utterly unlike Julius, Subaru thought he saw excitement in the most perfect knight's eyes. But the moment he regained his senses, Subaru began to suspect that something was up. What's gotten into this knight? Could Subaru have upset his composure that much? Subaru, quit joking around. I always thought your jokes aren't very funny, you know. Julius, if that sounded like a joke to you, then it's only because you think far too little of yourself. But then again, perhaps that is exactly what made your speech what it was. It was a speech no one but you could have made. Subaru, you really are making fun of me, aren't you? Considering the critical situation they were in, Julius' praises were only making Subaru more frustrated. Subaru had already gotten used to Julius' sarcasm by now, but this wasn't the time to be pointlessly bickering like this. If the speech didn't have the effect they had hoped for, then they'd need to come up with another plan as soon as possible. Subaru, instead of giving people strength, if all I did was make them distrust us, then it won't work even if I try again. Next time someone else should. Anastasia, Natsuki-kun, that's enough of your self-deprecation, you know? It's making people uncomfortable just listening. Saying this, Anastasia put a stop to Subaru's whining from the side. Glaring at Subaru with a look of disapproval on her adorable face. Anastasia, your speech was exceptionally effective, guess I have to spell it out for you since you can't seem to realize it yourself. Natsuki-kun, your speech was more perfect than we could have ever imagined. You have the talent of a true demagogue, you know. Ricardo, I'm with young miss you know. Kaya, that gave me shivers. What's with you and words? Why make it look easy, bro? The way White-tricked Emilia-sama, Crush-sama, that lil girl and ground dragon into Fallon all over ya, am I right? Subaru, both of you're saying things I can't just let slide. What you mean tricked? Who are you calling a demagogue? Listening to their overly scandalous evaluations, Subaru raised his voice, shouting. But Anastasia and Ricardo only innocently looked at each other and shrugged. And here, seeing how everyone seemed to be in on it, Subaru began to suspect that they weren't entirely joking. This grew all the more obvious when he saw Garfield, squatting on the floor, watching him. Garfield, Captain. Subaru, Garfield, what do you think? Garfield, Captain's the captain, right? I was right to follow ya out of sanctuary. That's what I think. Subaru, your expectations are always a bit too heavy on me. Garfield, well that's your own fault, ain't it, Captain? Garfield got up and walked over to him, flashing his fangs smiling. Seeing this, Subaru expelled a sigh through his nostrils and... Subaru, in that case, running from my responsibilities would be the same as giving up, wouldn't it? I don't want that to happen, that's probably what I said in the broadcast, right? Anastasia, there you go. Anastasia smiled, watching Subaru scratching his head, looking deflated as if only just now accepting this. She pumped up her little chest at this unexpectedly good outcome and softly rubbed her scarf with her hand. Anastasia, in fact, you've raised everyone's morale so high that I'm getting worried they'll start doing something stupid. Even here, you've got us pumped full of spirit on account of Wrath's authority, you know. Subaru, if you exaggerate like that I'm gonna think you're pulling my leg again. Seriously, just how good of a radio DJ was I anyway? Getting hoisted up higher and higher was only making it harder to wrap his head around it. Tearing himself away from the whirlpool of warm gazes, Subaru slowly walked up to the arcane device once more. Subaru, in any case, if that speech had made a difference, that's better than anything. Hopefully, this'll be enough to stave off any more violence in the refuge shelters. So, any thoughts on our next step? Anastasia, now that the citizens are calmed down, we've taken care of everything apart from the root cause itself. However, after Natsuki-kun's speech, the witch cult definitely knows about our intentions now. Subaru, wonder what their reaction will be. Like you guys said, aside from the fact that it'll be irrational, there's not much else to go on. At the same time, we must settle this as soon as possible. Regardless of the effectiveness of Subaru's speech, it didn't change the fact that the means to destroy this city was still held in the hands of lunatics. Even with the greatest optimism, chances were, the great water gates would be released at the stroke of midnight and the city would be swallowed beneath the flood. No matter what, they must end this before that happens. Anastasia, and to do this, we'll need to capture all 4 towers at once. Correct? Subaru, there are 4 Sin archbishops and 2 enemies we don't know about. We'll need to consult with our forces on how to tackle this. Simultaneously capturing all 4 control towers is the necessary condition for saving this city. Concentrating their forces like they did for assault on the city hall wouldn't work here. Since, as soon as they attack any of the towers, there would be the risk of the other 3 releasing the floodgates. Subaru wasn't confident that they could survive these odds 4 times in a row. Up against 6 major enemies, their fighting strength was. Subaru, it's a difficult hand. There's the chance it could turn into a repeat of our attack on the city hall. But if we could have at least one more card. In that case, how about a joker? While Subaru counted their forces on the fingers of his hands, a voice abruptly chimed in. Without thinking, Subaru turned towards the figure standing at the entrance of the room, and Subaru, sounds like in the time since I last saw you, your evaluation of yourself has gone up quite a bit. Not nearly as much as Natsuki-san, being asked to make speeches and all. I never thought I had a hero among my friends, but guess I was wrong. Subaru, still don't think it suits me though. Seeing the figure shoot him a mischievous smile, Subaru shrugged his shoulders and laughed. Then, walking up to the entrance, he gave that smiling figure a high five. Watching this reunion, Garfield's face also brightened. Garfield, Otto bro. You're safe, ain't ya? At Garfield's delighted call, Otto, who had been missing since the trouble started, answered with a nod. Aside from the dirt on his clothing, Otto seemed completely unhurt. Joining them, he gave the approaching Garfield a high five as well. Otto, I barely escaped with my life. It's a miracle that I survived and somehow made it here alive. Glad to see you two are safe. Though, I know you guys are way harder to kill than I am, so I wasn't all that worried. Subaru, is that right? Actually, I wasn't all that worried about you either. Why is that? Garfield, I dunno. That's just Otto bro's natural vibes maybe? Otto, can't you worry about me a little more? In this kind of crisis, it was extremely dangerous to be out there alone, you know. But in reality he did manage to rejoin them, so that wasn't very convincing. Anyway, while they were in the middle of this joyous reunion, Anastasia clapped her hands and squeezed herself into the conversation. Anastasia, alright, calm down. First off, it's nice to see that Otto-kun is alive. And I'm sure there are mountains of things you want to ask each other about what you've been up to and such, but... Cutting off her words there, Anastasia shot Otto a glare with her green onion-colored eyes. Anastasia, that conspicuous remark you just made. Mind telling me what it meant? Otto, the Joker, right? It's a simple story. If I let him come in right away, my survival would have been pretty much overlooked, so I cleverly asked him to wait outside for a bit. Looking a little embarrassed, Otto walked over to the door at Anastasia's prodding and gave a signal to someone on the other side of the door. Preceded by the sound of footsteps, a new character walked into the room. And... Sorry I'm late. One sentence. And that utterance alone charged its listeners with the feeling of being reinforced by 10,000 men. Alongside the sensation of a gust of wind sweeping by, was the illusion of a towering flame appearing before their eyes, compelling their hearts to shudder. And in reality, this reunion did indeed hold that kind of power. For the strength that they have been dying to obtain had arrived. Reinhard Van Astria, it's a bit late, but I've come to join you. Saying this, the Red Flame Sword Saint announced his intention to join the fight. End of chapter 42, the newest hero and the most ancient hero.